Greetings everyone, my name is Emmanuel and I would like to welcome you to our program today. We are continuing with our series on rebuilding a new Africa through decentralization, and our topic today is righteousness and justice are the foundations for societal transformation. If we want to rebuild a new and prosperous Africa, we must promote righteousness and justice in our communities and in our nations. The Bible says righteousness exalts a nation, while sin is a reproach to the people. The Bible says that when the righteous are in government, the people rejoice, but when the wicked beareth rule, the people mourn. In Psalms 11 verse 3, the psalmist tells us that if the foundations be destroyed, what will the righteous do? See, the foundations that the psalmist is referring to in Psalms 11 verse 3 is justice and righteousness. Now, how do I know that? If we go to Psalms 89 verse 14, the Bible says that the foundations of the throne of a king is upon righteousness and justice. Now, Isaiah chapter 9 verse 6 and 7 also tells us that Jesus is a king and he's coming with a government, and his government, is established and ordered with righteousness and justice. So the foundations for societal transformation are righteousness and justice. Now, when we have righteousness and justice in our communities, there will be security, there will be political stability, there will be national prosperity, there will be economic development. But when there is no righteousness and justice in our communities, there will be insecurity, there will be exploitation of the poor, there will be the marginalization of minority groups, there will be economic exploitation of the poor and the needy and the strangers and the widows in our communities and in our nations. There will be political oppression of the people. That is why the psalmist tells us in Psalms 11 verse 1 that there will be no security when, the foundations are destroyed. The psalmist tells us in verse 2, Psalms 11 verse 2, that when there is no righteousness and justice, the wicked will oppress the righteous. That is why it is important for the church to teach and to preach and to promote righteousness and justice in our communities. When we promote righteousness and justice in our communities, there will be peace, there will be economic development, there will be national prosperity for all the citizens in our nations. But when there is no righteousness and justice in our nations, only those who are in government and those who have access to power will be the ones who will be enjoying the resources that are in our nations. The politicians will not care about the ordinary people. They will be concerned only about themselves and their cronies. They will be interested in buying houses in London, in buying houses in America, in buying houses in Dubai, and in investing in other countries. They will not care about their own country and about their own people. Is that not what is happening today in Africa and in other places? When there is no righteousness and justice in our communities, you see, the politicians will not care to provide the basic necessities for their citizens. They will not build roads. They will not build hospitals. They will not build schools. They will not provide drinking water. They will not provide the basic necessities that the people need. Instead, they will be focusing on how to amass wealth for themselves and their cronies and their family members. Look at some of our leaders today in Africa. When they are sick, they travel abroad for medical treatment. When their children want to go to school, they send their children to the best schools in America and in London and in other places. Do you know how much, they pay? Do you know the tuition cost in some of these schools? $80,000, $70,000, $50,000. These schools are expensive. How do our politicians get the money to pay the tuition fee for their kids in maybe Yale, Oxford, Harvard, and some of the Ivy League schools in America and in London and in other places? They are siphoning public funds while the poor and the needy are suffering. That's why the Bible says that when the wicked are in government, the people mourn, the people suffer. That is why it's important for the church to promote righteousness and justice in our communities and in our nations. When there is no righteousness and justice in our communities and in our nations, our people suffer. Our people mourn. When there is no righteousness and justice in our communities, there will be economic exploitation. When there is no righteousness and justice in our communities and in our nations, there will be tribalism. When there is no righteousness and justice in our communities and in our nations, there will be social discrimination. There will be marginalization of minority groups in our communities and in our nations. When there is no righteousness and justice in our communities and in our nations, there will be political instability, there will be conflicts, there will be wars, there will be economic exploitation. That is why the church must promote righteousness and justice in our communities and in our nations. Under the rule of Saul, because there was no righteousness and justice under his kingdom, Saul, who was the king, he wanted to kill David. Saul wanted to kill his own son, Jonathan, because Jonathan was a friend to David. Saul killed, the priests because they assisted David. He saw David as his enemy. Saul became a tyrant. Why? Because there was no righteousness and justice under his kingdom. When there is no righteousness and justice in our nations and in our communities, our political leaders, they will become tyrants. They will be oppressing us. There will be no freedom of religion. There will be no freedom of speech. There will be no freedom of movement. There will be no freedom to petition the government. When there is a crisis and citizens go out to protest against the injustice, towards them, the government will send the military to oppress them, to arrest them, to beat them up, and to lock them up without due process. Why? Because there is no righteousness and justice in our nations. Why? Because there is no righteousness and justice in our communities. That is why it is important for the church to preach righteousness and justice. That is why it is important for the church to teach righteousness and justice. The church is supposed to be the voice of the voiceless. The church is supposed to be the defender of the defenseless. The church is supposed to be the conscience of the nation. The church must preach righteousness and justice in our communities and in our nations, so that our nations will prosper, so that there will be peace and security in our nations. Thank you so much for watching this video. We are going to continue next time. Until then, bye-bye.